The city glowed like a jewel box at twilight, towers of steel and glass rising against the fading sun. High above, in a penthouse that seemed to hover above Manhattan itself, Damien Cross stood framed by windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. At 45, he was the embodiment of triumph carved from ambition, broad shoulders filling the perfect cut of a charcoal Armani suit, a face sharpened by success and years of unrelenting will. His reflection gleamed in the glass, a man who had built an empire from dust and dared the world to doubt him. He had once been a boy with empty pockets and hungrier dreams. Now, his name alone bent boardrooms, moved markets, and landed on glossy covers where the words visionary and tycoon were printed beside his cool gray eyes. The penthouse buzzed with preparation. Staff hurried through like shadows, arranging crystal stemware, placing silver trays of amuse-bouches on marble counters. The evening would bring another gala, another parade of politicians, investors, and starlets eager to be seen near Damien Cross. His calendar overflowed with invitations, each one a testament to his power. To the world, he was untouchable, polished, a titan who had climbed too high for ordinary storms to touch him. Beside him, in this golden cage of glass and steel, was Vivian. She entered the room like a painting come to life, a cascade of black silk slipping around her frame, diamonds catching fire beneath the recessed lights. Her beauty was the kind that silenced rooms, the kind that cameras loved. Tonight she was perfection sculpted for photographs, luminous skin, scarlet lips, every detail flawless. She glided across the marble with a flute of champagne, pausing to rest her manicured hand on his arm. To the world, they were the dream, power and beauty entwined. Yet when her eyes lifted to meet his, there was distance, a coolness. The smile that curved her lips never reached those eyes. It was the same smile she wore at galas, at press conferences, in society spreads. A smile for cameras, not for him. Damien, used to closing billion-dollar deals and reading competitors' bluffs, chose not to see it. He convinced himself that this was how marriage looked after 10 years. Polished, practical, perfect on the surface. The city stretched endlessly beneath them, a kingdom he believed belonged to him alone. Yet even now, hairline fractures whispered at the edges of his empire. His chief financial officer had raised questions about missing transfers. A trusted broker had hesitated before assuring him all accounts were secure. He pushed the doubts aside, certain that control was his by right. He had survived too much, built too high to imagine collapse. And yet, unseen, someone else noticed what he refused to see. Downstairs, away from the gleaming chandeliers and marble staircases, Elena Marlowe moved quietly through the estate. 25, slight, dressed in a crisp uniform that marked her as part of the background, she was a presence so subdued that most guests never saw her. But she saw everything. Her hands worked swiftly, arranging flowers, polishing silver, folding linens with the precision of someone who knew invisibility was safety. Her eyes, dark and watchful, caught the small details others missed. The cold silence that lingered between Damien and Vivian when cameras weren't flashing. The half-finished phone calls Vivian ended the moment footsteps neared. The tension in the staff who served beneath the glittering surface. Elena did not belong to their world of fortunes and scandals, yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity that wealth could never manufacture. To Damien, she was another shadow in the machine of his household. To Vivian, she was disposable, faceless. But Elena knew better. Empires crumbled not from the roar of storms, but from the whispers of fractures ignored. And as the evening pressed forward, she sensed, without knowing how, that cracks were widening all around Damien Cross. He stood in his kingdom of glass, believing it unshakable, while far below, the first faint tremors of betrayal stirred. Elena carried them silently, unseen, as though she alone could hear the echo of the coming storm. And though Damien would not look at her now, the day would come when the empire he trusted would shatter, and the invisible maid he never saw would be the only one who truly saw him. Opened not with silence, but with the weight of whispers that slid like knives through velvet curtains. Vivian Cross was a woman who thrived on shadows, her voice sweet enough to charm her husband yet sharp enough to cut alliances in secret. She moved through their penthouse as if it were a stage. Each step calculated, her silk gown sweeping behind her like smoke. When she thought herself alone, her words were venom. Poured softly into the receiver of a hidden phone, Damien never doubted her. He saw her as the final jewel in his crown, but Elena Marlowe saw what he refused to see as she dusted the mirrored consoles and folded napkins with careful precision. She caught fragments of conversation. Vivienne's voice low and urgent about signatures, about transfers, about a man named Ronan whose laughter curled cruel through the line. Elena froze, her hands gripping fabric too tightly to hide the tremor. She knew better than to listen. Yet how could she turn away when each whispered word hinted at ruin? Suspense coiled tighter that evening as Damien prepared for another gala, his reflection in the mirror perfect yet blind to the storm rising behind him. Vivienne kissed his cheek lightly, her lipstick leaving no trace, as if even color refused to cling to him. She slipped her hand into his arm, smiling with practiced brilliance, but her eyes glittered cold like shards of broken glass. In the hall, Elena passed with a tray. She lowered her gaze, as always invisible, yet her ears caught Vivienne's hurried words to a shadow waiting in the corridor. "Be patient. It is almost finished by the end of the month. His empire will be ashes." The words lodged in Elena's chest. Damien was not her master, but he was her employer, the one who signed her wages that paid for her father's medicine. She thought of warning him, but fear struck her throat. He had dismissed her once when she tried to hint at a missing ledger page, brushed her off with the arrogance of a man too powerful to imagine betrayal. If she spoke again, he might cast her out, and then who would care for her father? The night moved like a slow, tightening snare. Damien raised glasses with senators, laughed with magnates, shook hands with stars, his wife at his side radiant and hollow. Elena moved silently among them, refilling glasses, collecting empty plates, her eyes restless, her heart heavy. She wanted to shout to break through the illusion, but instead she walked like a ghost among glittering masks, and in that moment, the suspense thickened. The empire at dusk teetered on the edge of night, and though Damien Cross believed himself invincible, the maid who no one saw had already heard the sound of glass beginning to crack, began with brilliance that turned suddenly into ruin. The anniversary gala was meant to be a night of triumph for Damien Cross, his empire's 10th year at the top. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, gold light spilling over gowns and tuxedos, the sound of violins filling the air like a promise of eternity. Damien entered hand in hand with Vivienne, their smiles flawless for the crowd. He believed himself untouchable. He believed the night belonged to him. But fate had other plans. The first tremor came not from the music, but from the arrival of men in dark suits, their badges gleaming like steel in the glow of champagne flutes. The music faltered. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Damien turned his head, his smile still fixed, though his pulse quickened. The lead officer spoke his name clear and sharp. "Damien Cross, you are under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and falsification of corporate accounts." Gasps erupted. Glasses slipped from trembling hands, one shattered on marble, and the sound echoed like thunder. Vivienne clutched her chest, eyes wide with perfect imitation of shock. Her voice broke in a cry that fooled them all. Damien. How could this be her performance, painted her as the betrayed wife, when in truth she had orchestrated every thread of this trap? Damien tried to protest, his voice firm yet trembling. He demanded answers. He called it a mistake, but the crowd had already turned their eyes on him, no longer with admiration, but with suspicion. The mighty were always loved until they stumbled. Then the world waited to feast on their fall. From the corner of the room, Elena watched, her heart pounding. She had seen this coming, in fragments of whispers, in the hollow glint of Vivienne's smile. She held a tray, but her hands shook so violently the glasses rattled. One slipped, crashing to the floor. She froze, certain someone would shout at her, but no one even noticed the invisible maid. All eyes were fixed on the spectacle of a king being stripped of his crown. Damien was led away before the glittering crowd, his empire collapsing in the time it took for a violin bow to stop mid-note. Vivienne played her role so flawlessly. Even Damien doubted himself for a moment, wondering if somehow he had missed a truth. She knew the cameras caught her weeping as she whispered that she stood by her husband, while secretly her gaze slid toward the shadows where Ronan lingered. His lips curled into a smile meant only for her. The night that began with light ended in humiliation for Damien. His reputation shattered, his fortune frozen, his trust betrayed. He thought of Elena's quiet attempt to warn him weeks before, and how he had silenced her with arrogance now as he was taken away under the weight of stares and whispers. The truth pressed into him like a knife. Perhaps the only person who had ever seen the cracks was the maid. He never saw at all. A silence so heavy it pressed against Damien Cross. Like chains gone was the glittering penthouse, gone were the chandeliers and champagne. The world that once bowed to him now slammed doors in his face. His fortune was frozen. His name dragged through every headline. The king of glass towers reduced to a man pacing alone in a dim apartment with peeling paint and broken locks. The betrayal gnawed at him. He replayed the anniversary night again and again. Vivian's trembling hand, her perfect tears. The gasps of guests who once cheered his victories. Every memory struck like a hammer. The humiliation burrowed into his veins until even the mirror mocked him. Once he saw power, now he saw ruin. The city that once lit up for him felt colder. Each night his calls went unanswered. Business partners vanished, friends too busy to remember his name. Even the staff who had worked beneath him for years whispered as they left one by one Elena was gone too. Dismissed in disgrace when Vivian accused her of theft, her absence left a strange hollow in Damien's chest, though he would never admit it, perhaps because she was the only one who had looked at him, not with envy or fear, but with something gentler, something truer. His descent was merciless. Whiskey bottles lined the table. His suit jackets hung like corpses in the closet. His hands, once steady enough to sign billion-dollar contracts, now trembled with rage and despair. He sat in the dark nights, blending together the sound of his own breath, the only reminder he was still alive, and still shadows followed him. Vivienne paraded across society pages, radiant by the side of Ronan, his rival, their laughter caught in paparazzi flashes. Her betrayal sharpened with every photograph. Damien's fury burned, but beneath it throbbed something deeper, a wound that would not close. How had he been so blind? How had he missed the cracks Elena had seen? Outside, the winter grew harsh. Snow swept the streets like ash. Damien walked them in the small hours, coat collar up, whiskey in his veins. His empire was ash, his pride broken yet. Still, he walked, unable to stop chasing echoes of the life he had lost, and on one such night as the snow thickened and the city blurred, Damien collapsed, his body crumpled against the cold pavement. The world he built had already abandoned him, but fate had one more card to play. Someone's footsteps slowed. Someone knelt beside him, a voice soft and familiar, whispering his name. Elena Marlowe. The maid cast aside. Now the only soul who still saw him, suspense thickened as her trembling hands tried to lift the man who once towered over her. Damien Cross was broken, but not yet finished, and in that moment of ruin, a new chapter began. Though neither of them yet knew what storm would rise from the ashes, in the hush of a forgotten apartment, Elena had dragged Damien there through the biting wind, her hands numb, her body trembling from the weight of him. The man who once ruled over glass towers now lay shivering on a worn sofa, his breath shallow, his skin pale. She covered him with the only blanket she owned and set a pot of water to boil the tiny stove, flickering with uncertain flame. Damien stirred, his eyes flicking open, gray and clouded with defeat. When he saw her, his pride flared weakly. "What are you doing here?" He rasped, his voice rough with cold and drink. "You should have left me." Elena met his gaze steady, though her heart raced. "I could not leave you in the snow, not even after what you allowed Vivienne to do to me." His eyes faltered, memory cutting him sharper than any blade he had watched as Vivienne accused Elena of theft, and he had done nothing. He had believed the lies too easily. Now shame burned deeper than the fever in his body. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything left unsaid. Elena tended to him quietly, spooning broth between his lips, washing the sweat from his forehead, her movements careful, her touch steady. Damien wanted to protest, to reclaim his pride, but each time he opened his mouth, the truth pressed harder. He was nothing without his empire, nothing without control, and yet this woman, this maid who had every reason to abandon him, sat here keeping him alive. Outside the storm raged, but inside suspense grew with every glance between them. Damien's mind churned. Why was she here? What did she hope to gain? Pity for a fallen king or something more dangerous? Forgiveness. Days blurred into nights. Damien's strength returned piece by piece as he rose from the sofa. He began to see details he once overlooked, the way Elena's hands bore calluses from years of work, the quiet dignity in the way she carried herself even in rags, the sorrow in her eyes when she spoke of her father's illness and the medicine she could barely afford. And then one evening, when the storm outside roared like a beast, Damien caught her at the window, staring into the night, her face lit by the faint glow of the city. He stepped closer, his voice low. "Why did you save me?" Elena turned slowly, her answer barely more than a whisper. "Because no one deserves to be left to die, not even you." The words struck him harder than any boardroom betrayal. Not even you. They were simple yet laced with truth. Damien realized then that beneath her gentleness was steel. She had seen through his empire, his arrogance, his downfall, and still chosen mercy. Suspense deepened as their eyes locked. The space between them charged with something Damien could not name yet. In that silence, a seed was planted, something fragile and dangerous, something that would change both of their lives forever. The slow rebirth of a man. Damien Cross no longer woke to the glitter of chandeliers, but to the scent of porridge cooking on Elena's stove and the faint sound of her humming as she prepared for her shifts at the hotel where she now scrubbed floors to survive each day. He watched her move through that tiny apartment, her back straight, her eyes steady, and he began to see something he had never seen before, a kind of quiet strength greater than all his towers of glass. But with strength came danger. Shadows lingered outside the door. Strangers loitered in the hall, their voices low, their eyes sharp. Ronan's men. Damien realized they were not content with taking his empire. They wanted him erased. Vivienne's betrayal was complete, her ambi. Tian bound to Ronan's greed. If Damien lived, if he rose again, their stolen empire would tremble. Suspense thickened when Damien confronted Elena one night as the wind howled against the cracked window. He told her the truth about the missing accounts, the fabricated charges, how Ronan had woven lies with Vivienne's hand, guiding every thread. Elena listened, her hands trembling yet her voice steady. "If this is true, then you cannot hide here forever." Her words pierced him. Damien had thought survival enough, but Elena's eyes demanded more. "You built an empire once," she said quietly. "If you let them destroy you without a fight, then maybe you never deserved it in the first place." Her honesty cut him deeper than any insult. Yet in it he felt something stir, not just anger, not just pride, but the will to rise again. Still the threat grew. One evening Damien returned from buying bread to find the apartment door cracked open. Elena inside, frozen as two men rifled through her drawers. One sneered when Damien entered, calling him a ghost of a king. They lunged, but Damien fought like a man with nothing left to lose, every punch driven not by strength but by fury. Elena screamed his name as the men fled, leaving behind a warning. "This is only the beginning." The apartment shook with silence after Damien leaned against the wall, blood at his lip. Breath ragged, Elena rushed to him, her hands gentle on his face, her eyes wide with fear. And something else, something unspoken. Damien caught her hand, held it longer than he should, his voice rough. "I will not let them touch you." In that vow, suspense surged. The broken millionaire who once ruled the city now stood with nothing but a maid at his side, yet in the fire of betrayal and the shadow of danger, something unbreakable was being forged between them. The world thought him finished, but Damien Cross was about to rise from ruin, and Elena would be the reason he did. The city cloaked in midnight rain, streets glistening like black mirrors as Damien Cross walked beside Elena, their breaths visible in the cold, their silence heavy with the weight of secrets. Damien had made his choice. He would not hide any longer, but to strike back against Ronan and Vivienne. He needed more than rage. He needed proof and allies. Elena led him through a narrow alley to the back door of the hotel where she worked. She slipped him inside, past the kitchens and up creaking stairs to a forgotten storage room. She lit a single lamp, her voice low. "There is someone you must meet." A woman stepped from the shadows, tall, sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that could slice through lies. Her name was Maris Calder, an investigative journalist, long silenced by Ronan's empire. Damien recognized her instantly. She had once tried to expose corruption in his company, but Vivienne had ensured her downfall. Maris studied him with open contempt. "So the king has fallen," she said coldly. "Why should I trust you now?" Damien did not flinch, his voice steady. "Because they did not just take my empire. They took everything, my name, my future, and they will not stop until I am dead." Help me, and I will give you the story that destroys them." The air thickened with suspense. Maris tilted her head, measuring him, her gaze flicking to Elena, who stood quietly by the lamp, her loyalty unshaken. Maris saw in the maid what Damien had only begun to see, a truth-teller who could not be bought after a long silence. Maris spoke fine. "But know this, Cross, if you betray me, like your wife betrayed you, I will burn you myself. Together." They began digging through the fragments of evidence. Elena had secretly kept scraps of ledgers, overheard conversations, even a copy of Vivian's signature on a transfer. She never meant Damien to see each piece. A spark in the darkness. Maris connected the dots, weaving a net of proof strong enough to two opal giants. But danger lurked with every step. Late one night, as Elena returned from her shift, she found the apartment door ajar. The lamp overturned, the floor scattered with papers. Her chest tightened until Damien's voice emerged from the shadows, calm but edged. "They are watching us closer now. We have days, maybe hours before they strike harder." Suspense deepened when Elena confessed what she had never dared to before. She had once overheard Vivienne planning a final move, something tied to an offshore account hidden beneath layers of deception. Damien's eyes burned with determination. "We find that account," he said, "and the empire they stole crumbles." In the rain-soaked silence of that night, Elena felt the world shifting. She was no longer just a maid, nor was Damien merely a fallen king. They were allies bound by truth and betrayal, their every step forward a step deeper into danger, yet also a step closer to redemption. The storm was gathering, and they were standing directly in its path, the city buzzing under neon light, but beneath its glow, Damien Cross moved like a hunted man. Every alley seemed to breathe with eyes, every car engine that idled. Too long carried menace, yet he pressed forward, his hand steady on the small drive Maris had given him. Inside lay files that could expose Ronan's network of offshore accounts, the key to reclaiming his empire. But danger was already tightening its grip. Maris warned him that their movements had been traced. Men in tailored suits lingered outside the hotel, their gazes sharp, their silence louder than threats. Elena felt the chill each time she passed them on her way to work, her steps quick, her breath shallow. The quiet maid now lived in a world of shadows where each knock at the door might mean the end. Suspense sharpened when Damien uncovered the first true piece of betrayal, Vivian's signature authorizing the transfer of his fortune into a shell company owned by Ronan. The ink was hers, the flourish unmistakable. Damien stared at it until his vision blurred. Rage pressed against his chest, but behind the rage came sorrow, the kind that crushed bone. He whispered her name, not in anger but in disbelief, as if even now some part of him could not let go. That night, Elena found him sitting in the dark, the paper clenched in his fist. She stepped closer, her voice quiet. "You always thought her love was your shield, but it was the knife instead." Damien looked up, his eyes raw with pain. "Then why did you save me, Elena? Why not let me fall?" Elena hesitated, her hands twisting together before she answered. "Because I saw a man who was already broken, and I could not bear to watch him shatter completely." Their silence after those words was heavy, charged with something neither dared to name. But even as the distance between them narrowed, footsteps echoed in the hall. Heavy, deliberate. Damien pulled Elena back against the wall, whispering, "Stay silent." The door shuddered once, then again, before splintering. Two men stormed inside, their eyes cold, their voices flat. "Mr. Cross, your time is over." The fight that followed was chaos. Damien moved with the fury of a man cornered, every strike fueled by betrayal, every breath stolen by rage. Elena tried to scream, but one man lunged at her. Damien threw himself between them, his fist crashing into the intruder's jaw. The men fled, leaving the apartment wrecked, the warning clear: the next time they would not fail. As silence returned, Damien collapsed to his knees, blood at his temple. Elena knelt beside him, tears in her eyes, her hands trembling over his face. Damien caught her wrist, his voice ragged. "They will not take me, not while you are here with me, and in that vow suspense D." Peanut love began to spark, not in the safety of luxury, but in the ashes of danger, a bond forged in ruin and fire. The world was hunting Damien Cross, but with Elena at his side, he was no longer afraid to fight back. The city trembling under rumors, headlines screamed of corporate wars, secret accounts, and vanishing millions. Yet behind the noise, Damien Cross prepared for his final strike. Maris had traced the last offshore vault, the place where Vivian and Ronan had buried his empire. The vault was hidden behind layers of false names and silent partners, but now they had the key, and with it the chance to tear down everything. Still, the walls closed in tighter. Each day, men followed Elena to the hotel, cornering her in narrow halls, their words dripping with menace. "Tell your broken king to stop digging or you will pay." She returned pale, her hands shaking but her eyes fierce. When Damien saw her fear, his fury erupted. He swore they would never touch her. Not while he still drew breath. Suspense reached new heights when Vivian herself returned to the stage. She arrived at a charity gala glittering in diamonds, her smile a weapon. Reporters swarmed as she painted herself the victim of Damien's downfall. The betrayed wife forced to rebuild her life with the comfort of an old friend. Ronan. She raised a glass to the crowd, her laugh echoing like poison. But Maris captured every lie, every slip of her tongue, proof that her innocence was an illusion. Damien watched from the shadows hidden among the crowd, his jaw tight, his heart a battlefield. Seeing Vivian's hand rest on Ronan's arm twisted the knife deeper. But when his gaze drifted to Elena, standing at the edge of the ballroom in her borrowed dress, something shifted. The maid who once blended into corners now stood with quiet grace, her eyes meeting his, steady, unwavering. And in that glance, Damien realized his fight was no longer about vengeance alone. Nay, it was about the future he wanted to claim with her. The night turned when Maurice slipped him the final piece of evidence, a document bearing both Vivian's and Ronan's signatures, proof of the stolen empire. But as Damien closed his fist around it, chaos erupted. Alarms blared, lights shattered, the crowd screamed. Masked men stormed the ballroom, weapons raised, guests scrambled in terror, and in the confusion, Vivian's eyes found his sharp with recognition. Damien grabbed Elena, pulling her through the chaos, glass crunching beneath their feet. The masked men were not thieves, they were hunters, and their target was him. He shoved Elena toward a service exit, his voice raw, "Run," but she refused, gripping his arm, her voice breaking. "Not without you." Together, they plunged into the dark of the night, chased by shadows and betrayal. Suspense coiled tighter than ever. The empire of glass had fallen. The empire of lies was cracking, and Damien Cross stood at the edge of ruin and rebirth, with only Elena's hand anchoring him to hope the final reckoning was no longer distant. It was already upon them, in the dead of night, the storm outside beating against the city like drums of war. Damien Cross stood in a warehouse lit only by a single hanging bulb, the stolen documents spread across a metal table. Maris typed furiously, her laptop feeding the evidence into every network, every news outlet, every financial tribunal. By dawn, the world would know the truth. Vivian and Ronan's empire of lies would burn, but the air was thick with danger. Footsteps echoed from outside, cars pulling up doors, slamming, men shouting. Damien knew this was the end game. Ronan was not a man who surrendered. He was a man who erased problems before they could speak. Elena clutched Damien's arm, her breath sharp, her fear hidden beneath steady eyes. Maris glanced up, her voice tense. "They are here. You must decide now. Fight or flee." Suspense tightened as the doors burst open. Ronan strode in, flanked by armed men. His smile cold, his voice sharp. Damien crossed the fallen king, reduced to hiding in shadows and clinging to a maid. "How far you have fallen." Damien did not flinch, his eyes like steel. "Maybe I have fallen, but at least I did not crawl into bed with my enemy's wife." Vivian emerged, then dazzling even in betrayal. Her gaze slicing into Damien, she whispered, "You could have stayed broken, Damien. You could have let me go instead. You forced this ending." Her voice trembled, not with regret, but with fury. She had chosen her side, and now the game was set. The warehouse erupted into chaos, fists and gunfire tearing through the silence. Damien fought with a ferocity born of loss and love, his body a weapon, his rage unrelenting. Elena ducked beneath flying glass, dragging Maris towards safety, but one of the men cornered her, pressing a gun to her chest. Damien froze, his heart stopping until Elena's voice cut through the chaos, strong and unyielding. "Damien, do not stop, fight." Those words shattered the last of his doubt. He lunged forward, disarming the man with brutal force, his fists striking like thunder as Maris grabbed the weapon and fired a single warning shot. The men faltered, realizing their advantage was slipping. Ronan snarled, "Retreat," pulling Vivian with him, but not before Damien hurled the final blow, his voice echoing, "You will never own me again." Sirens wailed in the distance, the world closing in. Maris transmitted the last of the files, her voice fierce. "It is done by morning. You will be free. The empire stolen from you will crumble." Damien stood bloodied but unbowed, Elena at his side, her hand in his. His gaze softened as he looked at her in the wreckage. She had seen him broken. She had carried him through ruin, and now she stood as his anchor. The shocking reveal came. With dawn, newspapers blazed not with Damien's disgrace, but with Ronan and Vivian's collapse accounts. Frozen assets, seized reputations, destroyed their names forever. Stained, Damien Cross was no longer the broken king. He was the man who rose from ruin, not by wealth, not by power, but by the quiet strength of a maid who never let him die. And as the sun broke through the storm, Damien turned to Elena, his voice low but steady. "You saved me, Elena, not just from them, but from myself." And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel not rage, not pride, but love, born in the ashes of betrayal.